Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
Part of it is the adventure, but part of it is also the people and the community, and the way that people go about racing is it's great to be a part of. And we got to later in the race, we were gave someone one of our spare tubes because they had a tubeless bike that wasn't fixing, and we were able to help someone else out as well, which was great.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
That's right, folks. Let it rip. Welcome to episode 111 of the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Here we are, last week of 2024, and it's been quite the year. I don't know about you, but I'm happy to see it head into the rear view mirror. But looking forward to a great 2025. Fantastic races coming up. North American Championship is going to be in Canada. World Championship is going to be in Canada. A lot of Americans are going to be in Canada. It's Canada's year. But before we get to those podcasts, we have a friend of ours from Australia to talk to. Coming up today is Scott Balhatchet. Scott did his first race, the GeoQuest, Chris Dixon's race down in Australia. Did it back a while ago. This one's been in the vault for a little bit. And he had a great time. His first race, and it was 48 hours long. Those Aussies jump into the deep end of the pool with no problem at all. And it was a great episode and a good listen. And I appreciate Scott for coming on the show. So be sure to give it a good listen. We're glad that you're here. Happy New Year to everybody. Hope you have a fantastic 2025. We'll be back next year with new products, new ideas, new things to talk about. The Dark Zone loves adventure racing, and we hope that you love the Dark Zone. Don't forget to get out there. You keep racing. You keep training, because we all know that if you keep racing, we'll keep talking. See you on the other side. Imagine a world where young women in Afghanistan and Pakistan rise above societal constraints, embracing their strength and potential. Ascend Athletics is making this vision a reality. Through mountaineering-based leadership training, Ascend empowers girls and women aged 15 to 24 to become courageous leaders in their communities. By conquering physical summits, these young women build self-esteem and develop skills that last a lifetime. Operating since 2015 in Afghanistan, expanding to Pakistan in 2023, Ascend focuses on regions where gender inequality is most pronounced, providing tools for girls and women to lead empowered lives. Join the Dark Zone in supporting these brave young women as they climb towards a brighter future. Visit ascendathletics.org to learn more about and contribute to this transformative mission. And remember, Ascend pays nothing for the spot. We love the work that they do, and the Dark Zone is happy to support it.
Calling all adventure racers. The time has come to sign up for the Cerberus 3-Day Expedition Stage Race happening May 2nd through 4th, 2025 in the breathtaking Southwest Virginia mountains. This isn't just any race. It's 3 consecutive days, each packed with 10 to 12 hours of trekking, biking, and paddling. Whether you're a seasoned racer or a newcomer eager to dive in, Cerberus offers the perfect blend of challenge and camaraderie. Sanctioned by USARA and part of the AR World Series, your participation earns you points in both rankings. Plus, we got you covered with detailed topo maps, breakfast each morning around 5 a.m., dinner each evening when you finish around 7 p.m., and race-branded gear for those who register before March 1st, 2025. Enjoy free on-site camping or opt for a cozy cabin or nearby accommodations. And don't worry about the boats. We provide standard 2-seat canoes for each team. So assemble your team of 2 to 4 members and get ready for an unforgettable experience. Visit thecerberusrace.com to register and find all the details.
Welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. When we go and we search out guests, as listeners know, we want to bring in a wide variety of voices, wide variety of people. Adventure racing is a big tent. And sometimes we'll bring a guest on who has done multiple races across multiple disciplines, multiple times, and they're truly deeply established in the race. And the other end of the spectrum is that we have racers who are newer to the sport, who have enthusiasm and excitement. That is this episode today. We have Scott Balhatchet on. Scott is a resident of Sydney, Australia. He recently did his first race, the GeoQuest 48, put on by a friend of the pod, Chris Dixon. He had a fantastic experience, and we got connected after the race. And I knew I wanted to have Scott on the show to talk about his first race, his preparation, his experience. And I think he'll bring a really, really nice voice to the audience on being a newer racer and getting involved in the sport. So, Scott, welcome to the Dark Zone. Delighted that you're here today. For our listeners, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks heaps for having me, mate. I really appreciate it. Yeah, like you said, I'm based in Sydney, the very south of Sydney. Once you go past us, you're out of Sydney. So, and I live in the Royal National Park. So I'm surrounded by bushland all the time. I work for a organisation called YouthWorks, and we run Christian outdoor education programs. So I'm kind of outside all the time, running school camps, and I love adventure. Doesn't matter what type of adventure. It doesn't have to be epic mountain climbing. Anything that is, outcome unknown. Love getting out there.
Starting off on an adventure, knowing the result really is an adventure. It's more of a trip.
That's right. Or you might have a plan, but you don't know if the plan's if it's going to work out that way. So anything like that.
So the GeoQuest 48-hour race obviously is a mountain design supports that race, and Chris Dixon is the RD. That's a pretty big race to jump into for your first race. How did you end up on the start line of a 2-day race as your first race?
Yeah, I mean, it's so I turned 40 this year, and I had a big plan for my 40th for a little while, which was people say, what are you going to do for your 40th? And I thought, what I'd love to do? I would love to get, say, two of my good mates from work, and we're going to get in a helicopter. We're going to get someone to drop us in the middle of the Blue Mountains wilderness with a map. And the map is the area that we're dropped in, but we don't know where we are on the map. It's a 3-day hike from somewhere, and we have to figure out how to get ourselves back to civilization. That would be a great 40th adventure. Turns out helicopters are super expensive, and so that didn't happen. And then one of my other mates at work, he was signing up for GeoQuest, and they had a spare slot, and he said, "Hey, do you want to join our team?" And at first I said no, because I had just started soccer training for our soccer season. I play like very low grade, over 35 soccer, and 2 laps around the oval had me gassed. I was so out of shape. I said no to him a couple of times. He persisted a bit. And eventually I said, you know what, you've asked me so many times, and you know my situation. This is on you now. You know what you're getting yourself into. And so I said yes. And, 2 months, that was 2 months out. So I had 2 months to train, and found myself on the start line with my other teammates, and as ready as I could be to rock and roll.
So before we get into the start line experience preparation, tell us the name of your team.
So the name of our team was 3 Pringles and a Fighting Mongoose. And so
it's quite the interesting name.
It is. It's not a very serious name, and we weren't going out there to break any records. The 3 lads I race with are all single. They call themselves Single Pringles, and Fighting Mongoose is my default name when everyone suggests anything, because the mongoose just keeps fighting and he just keeps going.
He doesn't quit. Exactly, keeps going here.
That's right. That's all I had going for me.
So you follow a pretty common trajectory that, like, you're adventure adjacent, right? You say you work outdoors with YouthWorks. You have this quest for adventure for your 40th. You get dropped off by helicopter. That's cost prohibitive. And so you're involved in this general world. And all of a sudden an acquaintance, a teammate, a friend, a coworker comes along and says, hey, we have this thing, come do this thing with us. What was their pre-race preparation like? Have they done races before? Have they been involved before? Or were they brand new also?
Yeah, absolutely. No, these are guys who've raced before. So our team captain, Andy, he's Andy McLaughlin. He's the guy who asked me, and he and his brother, who we race with, Jimmy, both really solid guys and both very fit guys. Both had done races before. None of us had done a 48. But the other guys on the team, so Andy, Jimmy, and Bryce, had all done at least a couple of 24-hour races. And those guys are also, like I said, Andy and Jimmy are both runners and mountain bikers. Bryce does triathlons. And so, they were quite kind of up to the task and knew what to expect. They had done a 48, but
So that's a really good thing for us to talk about, the idea that while you were brand new to the race itself, you had teammates that could bridge you into the sport.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And so coming into it, I knew, and the whole team knew that I was going to be physically the weakest link. I was going to be the person who was going to struggle the most, but I think
now,
because
was that struggle based on a lack of physical preparation, the soccer pitch idea, or based on lack of experience?
Oh, no, I think physical preparation. So,
Okay.
Like I said, I like to adventure, and I don't mind a good sufferfest. I can think of, canyoning trips and other things that we've done where it's been a slog, and I can handle a slog, and sometimes even, that type 2 fun.
So you weren't about the movement forward. You were worried about the speed and the fitness compared to them.
That's right, exactly. Okay. And so, only having 2 months to train and to try and do my best to catch up as much as I can to these guys who are, very fit. That was our biggest challenge. Fortunately, like I said, the headspace was the guys. Everyone knew that going in, and so when we started, we had a little team meeting before a couple of weeks before the race, and what's our goal? And our goal was, okay, let's try and clear the course and do it in under 48 hours, even if that's 47 hours and 59 minutes,
right, taking every second of the course. I always joke that a 40-hour race take all 48 hours. Like you're
absolutely,
getting more money for your time.
Thunderbolt finished it in 27 hours. I was like, they didn't get their money's worth.
That's all that time on the course. 21 hours of race they left behind.
Mate, they were quick. They were so quick.
It is amazing the difference. The fast teams, how fast they move, and you say to yourself, like, how do they move that fast?
Yeah,
like it's amazing, right?
It is phenomenal. Yeah,
and it's what's nice about the racing too is that we're so adjacent to the fast teams. Same course, same start time. We see them for a little while, and then off they go down the road.
That's it. They're gone.
So you mentioned the pre-team meeting. The idea that you had this, and I don't want to point out the obvious, but it sounds like you level set the team expectations before the race.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and particularly because I had never met Jimmy, and so. That meeting was really important because, it's much better to meet someone before you get to the start line with them. But making sure that everyone realizes, hey, this is our goal. This is what we're setting out to do. If anyone's going to try and push past that, like, hang on, let's take a second. Right. This is what we set out to do. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And because they hadn't done a 48 yet, even though they're super fit, I think everyone was really wanting to just pace themselves to make sure that we finished and not, have a massive blowout.
So that's really interesting that everybody on the team was extending past their current capacity. For you, it was your first race, right? It was the physical component, but for them, it was their first longest race of 48 hours. So everybody on the team had that expectation of this is all new to us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there was definitely a vibe of that in the team. And so we were purposefully, don't know if cautious is the right word, but we were, I'll stick with cautious. We were purposefully going out there going, hey, let's not ruin ourselves so that we can't finish. Let's make sure we can get across the line. And next time, if we hit it up next year, then we can try and push ourselves a bit harder. We know what to expect.
Right, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to go out there and destroy yourselves, eat each other alive, have a terrible experience, and spoil the future races. That's
right, absolutely. And spoiler alert, we had a great time. We had a really good race, and as a team, we didn't eat each other alive. We made good decisions together. That. When we crossed the line, we were still mates.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is really important.
So it sounds like going into the race with those level set expectations was important because no one was surprised. You didn't get 5 hours into the race and it wasn't like one person was like, why aren't you moving faster or we're going too quickly? You all had an understanding of what you wanted to do going forward.
Yes.
How did you find, adventure racing, all different domains, right? And that's what makes adventure racing so great is we bring all these systems together to be successful.
Yes.
So you mentioned the physical preparation was really your concern getting into it. And how could you keep up and things like that? How did you do with the logistical preparation between the gears and the boating and all of that? Because you've mentioned you've done outdoor stuff, which is great. Yes. But then putting all those together into a race setting is sometimes complex. How did you do with the fire hose of logistical preparation?
To look back at myself, I was completely overpacked. I brought so much more than I needed. Now I had, like you said, because I'm in the outdoor ed space, I had a lot of gear already to start with. And I bought a few extra pieces, some bags for my bike for snacks and things like that. Bought a new backpack for the race, but that was overdue anyway. But then when I looked at all
by the way, just for the record, using a race to buy new gear is always a good idea.
Oh, 100%. Yes.
Yeah. Just just don't tell your financial partners. Whoever that person might be. Yeah. But always a good idea to buy new gear. Thank you for our listeners. Appreciate that encouragement. So
yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned the overpacking, and that reminds me of a common expression we hear is that we pack our fears.
Yes.
Right. If we think we're going to get hungry, we bring extra food. Same with the clothing. Did you find that you got trapped into that? Did you pack your fears?
I think I did, or I packed. I mean, for me, I guess fears / the unknown. I was like, oh, what if it's like this, or what if it's like this? And so, again, being from that outdoor ed space, I like to be prepared,
right? And
I like to. My pack when I go hiking, if I'm on a personal adventure, I have all my ultralight gear that I'm happy with. If I'm on a trip with students, my pack is very heavy because I'm trying to be prepared for different situations that might come up. And I think I approached it like the latter, trying to be prepared for lots of different situations.
So I had lots of gear. It's a completely common newer racer phenomenon. Like
perfect.
We'll be standing in the start line of a race. We look around and you always have the men and women who show up and they have like nothing. Like they're just like their pack is the size of a grapefruit, and they're like, okay, I guess their food's in there. And then you look back, and then there's people who are like they're ready for like 10 days in the bush, right? There's that dynamic, and so you found yourself in the middle of that.
Yeah, I definitely. And so gear wise, what ended up happening because we were it's a supported race. We had a support crew with us. So, shout out Cal and M were our support crew, who were amazing. But it gave us the ability. We actually had a ute with us, and we weren't just contained to 2 tubs. We actually had, enough gear. And so when I wasn't taking gear in that particular race, we had the ability to just leave it behind.
Exactly. If you were stuck with it for 48 hours.
Yeah, which was great. But yeah, I definitely, there is things in those tubs that I just didn't touch and I just did not need. Right. And food, you mentioned food. I think I ate half of the food that I had listened to, you did an episode with, I think it was Nick Hurth.
Nick Hurth, yeah.
And he talked a lot about nutrition, and he talked about a lot about calories and breaking them down by hour and things like that. So I thought, okay, I was making notes, thinking through all that, and I have no idea how he could take in that many calories consistently, because I could not keep up with that. And I had a bag set out per leg, like I prepared bags that were full of all kinds of different things.
By the way, great strategy, by the way, breaking your food. Right? My first expedition race, I just had bags of food with no design, and I was an idiot about it. And my teammate was like, dude, what are you doing? You learn. Break the bags down by section by race. Right.
Yeah, that's it. So I did leg 1, leg 2, leg 3, all the way through to leg 8. And but at the end of the race, I think I had at least 4 bags that I had not touched at all. And the things that I thought that would be, good for me, there's high density, high calorie density things. I tried some of the gels, which I had tried before the race, but then during the race, they made me feel awful, just like really nauseous. Yeah. And the little energy cubes, they weren't so bad. The thing that kept me going was really killer pythons. Just like lollies, Skittles, M&Ms, killer pythons.
Okay. Killer pythons. Okay.
Yeah, it's like Allen's snakes. I don't know if you have Allen's over there.
Dude, I'm in Jersey. I'm in Jersey.
Yeah, great. No,
you got me.
That's fine. Yeah, great. Well, speaking of bagels, one of the things that actually, after these gels were not doing it for me, we got into a TA at one point, and one of our sport crew, she made us up some sandwiches, and she made me just like a sandwich with ham on it.
Yeah.
And
real food.
Boy, that was the best.
Yeah.
It like filled me up and it kept me going. And that was a nice revelation, not just all these kind of high energy snacks, but some, as people have said on the show, whole foods
and real food. And it's interesting too. And Nick mentioned this. Nick's episode was like going to school. What a great episode.
Yeah, it was great. It was so good.
Go back and listen to Nick's episode. And I think what you learned there was very commonly that our bodies are so varied that what works for one person doesn't work for another. And so the only way you really know that is to go out and do your own thing, right? Yes. And to see what responds to your body. Personally, myself, later in the race, I'm all about simple sugar, simple foods, and I like to drink a lot of my calories. I just run out of the ability just to eat food late in races. But that's a me thing. I have teammates who have no problem eating a lot of food late in race. So it's interesting how and I love the fact that I'm envious and I sympathize with you being a first-time racer you're learning all these things in the environment itself.
Yeah, which is so much fun.
Right.
Like I really, I think, when I've broken down the race for people, like they say, how was your race? And I said, look, 70% of the time is having the time of my life, regardless of how hard things were
right.
or learning those lessons, and then 20% type 2 fun,
right.
I knew this was going to be hard. 10% the most demoralized I've ever been in my life.
And you
just
go through
really in the hurt locker.
And in 48 hours, you feel every single emotion you've ever had.
Yeah.
Right? You go through all of that.
100%. So
to sort of close the sentence on the foods, when you look back on that, what lessons will you bring into your next race that you learned? Aside from bringing too much food, which is very, very common, what have you learned about your own dietary needs going into your next race?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the whole foods, so more sort of sandwich type items in the bags or in the bins at the TAs to hit up. I probably won't bring any of those energy style things, the gels, the little cubes. I had some Cliff bars, they were all right, but muesli bars did kind of the same thing for me. Yeah. So, I think I wanted to keep it varied because I had heard that if you eat the same thing over and over again, you'll go insane. So I'll still want to keep it varied, but I think I'll actually be working in a much narrower space of variants.
You'll have exactly. It won't be such a broad spectrum of foods going in there. I will tell you that one thing I've learned is there's something to be said for if you have access to a bin, which is great to have access to, is trying to put in some sort of fresh fruit. Like the idea of having something that it will sit for a day. Like you got eventually it falls apart. It's no longer ripe. But having access to a banana or an orange. We were in Scotland and my teammate had a carrot that he took out of his pack, and it was like, the greatest thing ever. So I agree with you. But the idea that now you have a sense of your dietary needs and what you can or cannot eat. And I'll tell you that a 48-hour race experience is a really good testing ground for food for both shorter and longer races because you're out there long enough. You have a sense of the longer nutrition, but it's not like 5 days. And so it's good to learn that about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a bag of carrots in the car. Yeah. So that was one of the things. When I ate it, it tasted like the best carrot I've ever eaten.
It also feels like you're brushing your teeth.
Yes, that's true.
It kind of resets them. Because one thing I've noticed in terms of nutrition and food is that when you switch over to real food, what you avoid is getting mouth sores from all the sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's just such a nicer, and when you're in that stage of the race, particularly later in the race, and you're feeling run down, having something fresh kind of hit your body, it's a morale booster. Yeah. It makes you feel so good. The biggest morale booster I had food wise, I'll close off the food bit with this. We came into a TA. It was nighttime. Our team had lit a fire on the side of the road for us because it was getting a bit cold. And I had some leftover pizza from the night before we started the race. And I pulled out some pizza, put it on a stick, reheated it over the fire. And
Heaven.
I was so happy in that moment.
More pizza in a race? Scott, you're speaking my language.
Wood fire pizza, technically,
Exactly. Artisan pizza. So
it was great.
So the food thing you addressed, now walk us through the race itself. Was it now 48 hours? What were the stages like? Did it start with, was there a bike? Was there rafting? Like what were the different disciplines you had to access?
Yeah, so we had 3 standard disciplines, so kayaking, biking, and hiking. And we started with a kayak. So we started actually on the water. Chris had kind of made a start line on the water for us in a little inlet. And then so everyone started on the water, start gun, off we went. And we went through the inlet, down a channel, picked up a CP or 2, and then we were out into the ocean. And so it was an ocean kayak up the coast, around a headland and then we had to do a beach landing, which I've never kayaked a beach, kayaked into a beach with waves behind you. And fortunately, our kayak stayed upright.
Exactly.
The one that I was in, our other teammates
not so lucky.
Stay so upright, yeah. But they recovered very quickly.
Right. Well, the thing about a beach landing is that when you're doing it, there's a certain point where skill goes away and luck kicks in. And it's like, I just hope that, hope the waves slow down right now because we're going to be at the beach. Okay, and that's a pretty adventurous start to the race.
It was great. It was awesome.
Yeah.
And that first leg, there was one moment, one of the lessons that I learned was to back yourself. So I don't, my mate Brian, he's a skimo athlete for Australia, and he had kind of trained me up, give me a little training program to get as ready as I could physically for the program. For the race. And but the thing I was bringing to the race was, having worked in outdoor ed for a long time, my nav is pretty good. I've got that skill in my pocket. And so starting gun goes off, everyone bolts ahead. Myself and our teammates, we're kind of, it's back end of the pack, but it's all still a pack. And we were approaching this little bay where the first CP was. And I said to Jimmy, who was in the front of my kayak, I said, look, hey, Jimmy, I reckon, see where that tree is, and then to the left where that sign is, I think the CP is roughly, that's where we're headed. And he's like, cool. We're paddling, and the whole pack just blasted past that section. And so I was looking at the map, and I was like, I'm pretty sure it's over there, but, everyone's going this way. And so we kept paddling, and they kept paddling further. And the more we went past it, the more I was like, I'm sure we've gone past the CP. And everyone else has too. Soon enough, there was a kayak paddling back the other way.
Yeah,
and so I was like, Jimmy, turn, the herd mentality. And, not that this would have affected our race in any way, shape or form, but I was like, that was our opportunity to bag the first CP before anyone else did. And we could have technically been first
place,
for all of about 5 seconds,
Right. But you're still first. Well,
that's right.
It's funny you bring that up, right? Because it's always a tough call inside of a race. Like when the herd goes a certain way, you think, well, there's actually wisdom in but sometimes there isn't, right? And if you notice on episode 99, the one that came out a little while ago, Natalie Long talked about that. That's one section on the story in her race where she's like, listen, I told everybody not to go there, but a couple teams went that way, and people, and I think part of it is human nature, where we want to take the easiest way. And sometimes if we think someone else is doing the work for us, we'll grab onto them. The downside is the fact that they may be wrong.
That's right, exactly. And so I think the lesson I learned there was, if you've got the skill, back yourself, don't just, like I said, don't just go there because everyone else is going there. Everyone else could be wrong completely. And so that was a nice little lesson to learn. And I think it was actually at the start of the race, it was a helpful confidence booster because I was like, okay, cool. We were supposed to be where I thought we were.
Right.
I'm going to be tired through this race, but that skill will hopefully pay dividends later as well.
So you learned two things there. One thing you learned was the fact that your nav was sufficient compared to the crowd, and the crowd could be wrong also.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, two lessons. And we hadn't even hit the first CP. It was great.
There you go. You have 47 more hours of lessons waiting for you.
That's right.
So you had your beach finish, right? So you washed up on the beach. I like how, by the way, you work into that you finished fine, but your teammate dumped. I like how you worked that in. You pointed that out.
Just really subtly,
Slide that into the conversation. So now you come off the first paddle, and what'd you go into?
Yes. We went into a bike ride. Okay. So jumped on our bikes. We hit the TA. It was a slow TA, because we're changing out of wet gear into dry gear because we're going to be the next paddle wasn't until the second last leg of the race. Okay. So we were going to be dry for quite some time, and the weather was phenomenal. So we thought, okay, let's get dry. So we hopped on the bikes. And this bike leg, we actually ended up having a mechanical, which is a little bit frustrating. But again, new lessons. And
what was the mechanical?
So we were riding along. No, my derailleur lost tension and kind of seized. Oh. And so we tried to have a crack at fixing it. We couldn't. Unfortunately, we had brought a tow line with us because we knew that I was going to struggle physically sometimes. Right. We had a tow line on my bike, and so I jumped on Andy's bike. Andy jumped on my bike because he's a lot lighter than I am, and we took turns at towing that bike. And that really, that's
pretty challenging. That's a big thing psychologically in the start of a race. The fact that one of your four bikes goes down, that's hard.
Yeah, it was, and I was like, oh man, is this our race blown?
And then you're thinking to yourself, here I am, I'm the new guy, and my bike falls apart.
That's right, and it was my fault probably too because we were going through this real muddy kind of section, and the boys were kind of walking their bikes around the big puddles, and I was just riding through them because I was having the time of my life. And so it kind of got seized up, and so we towed the bike for must have been about an hour and a half. And then we came across another team, the Lost Wombats, Jason and Rachel, and we just happened to bump into them. We were coming up one road, they were coming up at another intersection, and so we just had a quick chat with them. Hey, how's you going? How's your race going? Mentioned to them, say, oh, we're doing all right, except one of our bikes is a bit cooked. And Rachel says, oh, what's wrong with it? Jace is a bike mechanic. Jason, our saviour, grabs the bike, has a look at it. It turns out that the derailleur was just full of crud, like that kind of clay mud had really caked it up.
Peanut butter.
Yeah, and so that's it, just like peanut butter. And so we washed it out, and he kind of got it back into tension, and we were back in the race.
That's great.
And you know what? In that moment, like I said, I play soccer, and in that moment, I was like, I think I'm done with soccer, and this is my new sport because you know, on the soccer pitch, we all go out, we're over 35, we pretend like we're 18. We soon realize we're not. Someone eventually comes in for a late bad tackle because we're old and slow. And then everyone kind of just wants to kill each other. And the comparison was that here, my race is cooked. I'm still 4 hours from the next TA where I can get a new bike. And this other team helped us and got us back in the race.
Yeah, isn't that amazing how the idea, like that kind of crossover to each other, and how when you're racing hard with each other, right? And it's a sport, right? You're going for it, like you want to win the race.
Yeah.
But then there's that level of like, we're out here together, we're in this together, and you will help each other out. Right?
Absolutely.
You know, it would be an interesting question if you were fighting for the first and second spot on the podium. Right, that's a different.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a pointy end of the race. That's the pointy end of the race, and very often the in race dynamics change over the course of the race field. Right,
yeah.
But I had a teammate one time in a race that I couldn't attend, that he gave his bike to another team because they had to do it. They had to do a paddle section. It was going to take quite a while. The other team took the bike because their bike was not going to work. They went. Yeah. They won the race on his bike, which they then transported back to him, which he then used to finish the race. Like, who does that?
That is, It's just a different like community of people, I think, and so that was a real eye opener to the way that the sport works, and really like. I was saying to you before we hit record, like I'm thoroughly addicted to this sport now, even just after one race. And part of it is the adventure, but part of it is also the people and the community and the way that people go about racing is it's great to be a part of. And we got to later in the race, we were, gave someone one of our spare tubes because they had a tubeless bike that wasn't fixing. And, we were able to help someone else out as well, which was great. And that's
the adventure. That's the component that makes it, I'm very thoughtful about other races and other formats. And there's a lot of different ways to get out there in the world, but I've had some experience in various multi-endurance sports, just by virtue of the fact that I'm just old. And I think that when I did my first adventure race and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. So many things came together. And what's nice for you is, for as bothersome as that mechanical was, you got a really, really early lesson into your adventure racing career about how the community responds to each other.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. It was, it was really eye-opening and really, I think encouraging is the word.
Yeah.
It was just so lovely. And we ended up crossing paths with the Lost Wombats a couple of times over the race, which was great because every time we cross paths with them, hey, how you doing? It's very quick and brief, but it's still really, there's a camaraderie rather than a rivalry.
There's that in-race experience that you have. So you have big paddle. You have a bit of a wonky bike.
Yep. Then we hit mystery discipline, which was a hedge maze. So we ended up at a winery. And it was great. And so we went in and we put up a pretty good time in the hedge maze. We were in and out of there in 15 minutes. So we were really stoked with that. And that was pretty much the only time on the course that we ran, because I had this rule. I said, guys, I actually can't run. Like my fitness level, I can walk fast consistently, but if we start running, I'm going to be cooked. So we pretty much didn't run the whole race, but in the maze, we were jogging around and pushing it to try and get through the maze. And so, we knocked that off in 15 minutes. And later found out at the finish line when Chris was handing out awards that some group was stuck in there for 49 minutes or something like that.
God.
So which they ended up coming third in their class, so they still did quite well.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, what a nightmare that would have been. And then we grabbed some food because it was about 6:30 p.m. by the time that we'd got there, and so we grabbed.
So how far? 12 hours into the race? Longer than that?
Yeah, we would have been just under 12 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, because we started 8 a.m. start and it was 6:30 p.m.
So how did you feel to yourself? So it's a cool. So you're 12 hours into the race, right? And if I do my math properly, you're 25% of the way into the race, but you've been working for 12 hours.
Yes,
how did
correct.
you? And 6:30 at night, it's starting to get a little bit darker, a little bit like.
Yeah,
where were
it was
you?
winter, so it was dark.
So where were you? Knowing that you had 36 hours of racing in front of you and 12 behind you, where were you mentally at that point?
I was still pumped and amped. I was at that point on the first night, grabbed some food, and then we put our helmets on with our torches on because we were going out for another bike leg. And so, popped the helmets on, torches on, looked at the guys like, okay, wave goodbye to the support crew. I'll see you in 8 hours.
I guess
I'm going off into the darkness.
Yeah.
How great is this?
Yeah.
So at that point, I was still kind of just riding a bit of an adrenaline high, and maybe that kind of, I can't believe we're doing this. How cool!
Yeah, how cool! Right?
So
the excitement of like diving into the unknown, and also too knowing that you're with people who you trusted, people who had experience too.
Oh, absolutely!
You were able to put aside as much concern as you may or may not have had. You could put it to the side because you trusted the people that you were with.
That's right. And. Yeah, right. I can imagine the difference between having a team where it's your mates and, people who I've been working with for 10 years and some people who I don't know as well.
Yeah,
I can understand how they would be two very different feelings, But I was with my mates. We're on adventure. And at this point, I was still riding high and really excited. And then on this leg,
so that clearly is the 70% fun category. We're still 70%
I'm still in 70%. Yeah.
So you dipped into type 2 fun at one point. What was that like? Where do they go now? Type 2 is as everybody knows, there's 3 types of fun.
Yes.
Type 1 fun is just general fun that's out there. It's great. Type 2 fun is it's hard at the time, but it's fun to talk about it later on. And type 3 fun, it is just miserable. You mentioned type 2 fun. So when did the race get type 2 for you?
At the end of this leg. So this leg, during this leg, I started to feel a little bit burdensome between the team because I was having to get towed a lot, it wasn't because the guys minded. Jimmy, Andy, and Bryce kind of all took turns towing me, and because they're all absolute beasts,
right?
It didn't really bother them, but I'm the one who knows that I'm needing to be towed.
It was your internal voice, right? Yeah,
that's right, exactly. And so that started to creep in, but also, this course that Chris designed, which was awesome course, we hit 3 really high peaks. So we did over the course, we did 4,900 meters of elevation, and this leg was the first leg where we hit some really major elevation. I think we did 1,300 meters of elevation.
Those are big numbers. That's a pretty beefy course.
It was. And this was, so there were 3 mountains that he wanted us to hit. And there's kind of a local story about the Mother Mountain and then the Brother Mountains. And so we were going up the Mother Mountain, which is the highest one. And to get there, it was just pretty much a slow, steady uphill climb. And then when we got to the mountain, it was super steep. And we actually left our bikes at the bottom and walked up because it was, we wouldn't have been able to ride up. It was just, so elevation all day. And when we got to that mountain, that I was in type 2, that was, it was a bit crushing, and my hips were starting to ache a bit. I was just starting to feel twinges of soreness because we'd been going for so long without stopping. And so that was when we kind of hit type 2 fun.
Well, that's the point when the lack of fitness, right? For in terms of time,
absolutely,
it kind of caught up with you, right? You could only go so far before eventually, you burn so many matches. You're hungry, you're tired, you're being pulled by your mates. And so all those things so you said to yourself, this isn't as much fun as I felt it was a little while ago.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It was definitely a different feeling from when we were leaving the TA. Yeah, absolutely. But eventually, we got through that. We hit that peak, and we chilled out up there to enjoy the view, even though it was must have been midnight when we got up there. It was middle of the night, but and windy, so windy when we got up there. We came down and we made our way back to the next TA, and so we pulled into the next TA at about 3 a.m. and the next leg was a Rogaine, and so we kind of had to make a decision: do we go into this Rogaine tired and it's dark, it's pitch black? And we actually decided to have a sleep at that point. And so at about 3 or 3:30 a.m., we slept and let's say, let's sleep for 3 hours. And when we wake up, it'll be light and we'll be a little bit more refreshed and we can approach some off track.
So you bring up a really good point about the idea in a 48-hour race, there has to be some sort of sleep strategy, right? There's sleep is debated a lot in racing. How long, like a 24-hour race, no one really sleeps.
No.
36 hours. You kind of push through, you kind of do it because you're up against probably 40 hours. So you're in a funny spot. 48 hours of racing. Because remember, you're not awake for 48 hours because you wake up before the race to get ready.
It's longer.
So you're looking at 50 hours of no sleep. So at some point in the race, you're going to have to catch your breath and you're going to have to take some sort of a sleep. And so your team strategy there was, which makes a lot of sense, was it's dark, winter, a little bit of cold. Everything gets better at daybreak. So you figure just kill some time, sleep, bank some sleep, and continue in the daylight.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was mainly because we had a plan going into the race that we were going to try and do the first 24 hours without sleeping, and then try and catch some sleep during the daytime the next day, so that when we wake up from that sleep, it's light and we feel like getting up.
Gotcha.
So that was our plan going into the race. But when we got there and we needed to do off-track nav, that was the decision maker, actually what's the best thing to do here? And so, it was definitely the right decision.
And so looking back, that makes a lot of sense because you killed the darkness, you got some rest and you went to work in the daylight.
That's right. Exactly. And this was the first point as well, where we had to start doing some compromising, because when we came in, our goal was, let's try and clear the course in 48 hours. Sorry. And at this point we decided to skip a couple of CPs because if we tried to get, there was four CPs in the Rogaine, and we decided just to pick up one of them and then keep moving because we were concerned about not making our 48 hours.
That's where you start doing that.
Became more important.
That in-race math gets really hard because you're tired, you're fatigued, you don't want to leave points on the course, but the penalty for being late is so high. And that's I will tell you that personally, that's one of the more challenging parts of racing that I find is when you're with a team and you're trying to say to yourself, well, do we do A or do we do B? Right. Yeah. And so clearly at that point you were making those calculations. You got one of the 4 points on the Rogaine. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got one of the 4 points, and that Andy made that call for us, like our team captain, and he was, it was 100% the right
call.
It was a great call. And so we, did that Rogaine very quickly. And then jumped on our bikes for the last bike leg. And that last bike leg was actually, it was a little bit of climbing, but then it was a lot of downhill down to the water. And it was actually probably one of the smoothest legs that we had, because it was on a cross between fire trails and roads, and it was much easier traveling than the night before had been.
And you were over 24 hours into the race. And so you were clearly, at this point, you were racing for the finish, right? There's a point in the race where you leave, where you're out there, and metaphorically or literally, you turn the corner and you're racing home as opposed to racing away from the start. And so that's where you were psychologically. Okay.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. And we're moving, and we actually, that 3 hours sleep had done amazing things for us.
Which is a big sleep, by the way. 3 hours is a big sleep in a race.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the longest time we spent at TA, obviously, but also we were actually, one of the things, again, a learning point, I was expecting that I would be able to be much quicker in the TAs than I actually was.
It's hard. Time drags on.
We bled so much time in the TAs, and that's fine. That's all part of the learning, but the shortest time we spent in the TA, I think, was half an hour, and anything above that, from 1 hour, 2 hours, and then 3 hours for our sleeping TA. So we bled a lot of time in the TAs. I had this picture in my head of like, I'm going to be in and out in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, the TA thing is interesting, right? Because clearly the TA has a physical need to kind of replenish your supplies. But for many people, the TA is a psychological need because they connect with other people. Right.
Absolutely.
And you see civil, and you catch up, and you get that. The problem is that you pass a point in a TA where all of a sudden you become a resident of the TA, and you got to leave.
That's right.
You got to like we always joke, don't go near the fire. Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Don't do that. Like get in, do your thing.
Yeah, the longer you stay, the harder it is to leave.
Exactly. And so you got to go. And so a good support person will say to you, that's time to go. And I've seen, and I've been at races, and I've been the recipient of this, where the race director is kind of like, it's time to leave. Like, it's not like there's more racing to do. Go do it. Right. So you had
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
So you had that sleep and you went into that. And then walk me through that. What came next?
Yeah, so what came next? Like I said, we hit the Rogaine, grabbed a point, and then hit the bike. And then once we hit the bike, we were kind of flying along at a pretty good pace into the next TA. And then in the next TA, that's where we transitioned to a hike. And so that was where we grabbed those Whole Foods that I was talking about. And that's where Em and Cal made us some sandwiches. And I think, the combination of the sandwiches, knowing that we didn't have to sit on a bike again for the rest of the race, there was a lot of kind of little morale boosters in that transition.
And the bike is done. So mechanically speaking, that's no longer an issue. It's behind you.
That's right. Exactly. Right. It can't trip us up anymore. And then we went to a hike. And when we went into the hike, I took over navigating with Bryce. So Andy and Bryce had been navigating on the bikes because they had the map boards on their bikes. But this was an opportunity for me to have a crack at navigating. Right. And between myself and Bryce, because we weren't running, just because we were just walking fast, we were kind of just navving as we went, and it's much easier to read the map when you're not running. Just that consistent fast walking pace. And so we made very, very few stops, and I would probably say that was our best leg for just consistent flow. Go in, grab the CP, find the CP, let's move to the next one. And, I'm walking with Bryce at the front of our group. Okay, Bryce, there's a turn coming up. It should hook around to our left up in about 50 meters. Yep, I can see it coming up. Are you happy that that's the turn? Yep, I'm happy that's the turn. Great. And we didn't even have to stop at the turn to check that we're in the right spot because we could just, we could nav on the move and not have to kind of stop and check.
That's a great feeling to keep going, because sometimes the stop and start it eats at people, right? If you're stopping every intersection and you look, to have that sense of flow feels really good. Obviously, it's a trade-off, right? Because you could be moving really quickly in the wrong direction, right? So obviously you're making a calculation.
Yeah, which we did on one of the bike legs. On the second bike leg, I made one because I was on Andy's bike. I had the map. I made a wrong navigational decision, which ended up being a 4 kilometer. Right. Not short, the opposite of a shortcut.
Right, exactly. Extra racing. You were out there getting your money's worth.
Yeah, but so we, they said the max on the logs sheet, they'd said the max time for that. The slowest teams are going to do that in, I think it was up to 10 hours, and we did in about 6.5. And so we were feeling really good that we'd kind of done really well in the leg. And then we hit the TA. That's where I had, the team had a fire for us at the side of the road. That's where I had my reheated pizza. But then we went into a kayak, and we went into a 30K kayak starting at 8:20 p.m.
That's hard.
And
darkness.
We've gotten to the 10%.
Yeah, that's where type 3 shows up. I mean, paddling, because the rhythmic nature of paddling is torture. Late in a race, darkness, paddling. So welcome to type 3. How'd that go for you?
Well, it was brutal. Brutal for a couple of reasons. One, it was a new moon, so we're on the water at night and there was no ambient light. So, and if we put our head torches on, it actually just illuminated all the fog that was in front of us. So we were paddling with no head torches. We could just see the very vague silhouette of the edges of the river, and we could see the glow sticks of the other boat that we were paddling with. And so it was really hard. We got through one river system. We decided then we hit a lake. And we had to cross the lake, and we decided to drop 2 more CPs there because instead of kind of going long ways around the edge of the lake, that just enabled us to cut across the lake.
Across.
Yeah. And so at the moment, it's a combination of type 3 and cool because, yes, we were demoralized, but also we're paddling on a lake in the dark with no head torches.
Yeah, it's pretty
and
cool.
Andy, it was cool. It was so cool. It was really cool. And Andy, he navved us across the lake, just compass and map, and he used the stars and to get us across. And we hit the CP that was on the other side of the lake. Bang on.
Go Andy.
He nailed it. It was such, and we're like, oh, that's pretty good. And then he hit the next one bang on as well. It was like, okay, that first one wasn't a fluke. Great job, mate. And then we went into the inlet on the other side of the lake, and the tide had turned against us.
Yeah.
And it was the middle of the tide, and so it took us an hour and a half to paddle 3 kilometers.
Yeah, and you're just fighting, and you're barely moving, and if you stop, you get pulled back. It's the worst.
And because it was so dark, we also couldn't really get a sense of how far we were moving.
Yeah.
So and at one point, Andy and I were both navving, and at one point, both of us independently thought, we didn't know this till after the race, but both of us independently thought, have we gone down the wrong, inlet? Are we in the wrong spot? Because it really shouldn't be taking us this long to get to that bridge that we're trying to get to.
Right.
And so that was, and it was cold. We pulled up on a boat ramp once we got to this bridge that would never come. But we got out, and we were, our legs had seized in that sit on kayak position, like in that, and we were shaking and free. I was absolutely freezing because I had made
Isn't it wild
decision.
how when you're paddling, you're fine body wise.
Yes.
The minute you stop, you start shivering.
Exactly. And the worst part of it is when we got to the end of that paddle, so we pulled into the TA at, again, it was around 3 or 3:30 a.m. I was actually, I was hypothermic.
Yeah.
And so I got out and my legs had seized, and I was standing there at the TA and my hands were visibly shaking. And all of us are outdoor ed guys. And so I was like, I've got all the umbles, right? The stumbles, the fumbles, the mumbles. I've got all these hypothermic signs going on, and I knew I was in a bad way, and I actually couldn't do anything about it. My body had kind of seized up, and I even had to get Cal, one of our support crew guys. I said to him, I can't take my wet shoes and socks off. Can you please take them off for me? I can't, and had to, warm up by the fire and stuff before we got off to the last leg. So that was the worst that I got, and it was
cold. It's dark. You're tired. Yeah, I did a scouting mission one time with the race director. We did this. It was late winter on this river in Pennsylvania. Really, really cold day. We got off the water. Our dry suits were frozen to us. You couldn't unzip your dry suit because everything with the water had frozen to us. It's a terrible feeling.
It is, and the reason that I was so bad, because not all the other guys were like this. I had made a silly mistake in the TA because I was tired, and I had put my warm layer on. I had just a wool shirt, but I had put it on the outside. I had a wetsuit top to wear, and I'd put it on the outside of my wetsuit top, not on the inside of my wetsuit top. So my warm layer wasn't doing anything because
it was just wet. It was just wet, heavy clothing. Right.
Yeah, that's right. And I'd made this stupid tired decision because I couldn't be bothered taking my wetsuit top back off, putting my thing, because we were just
amazing, right? You make a split-second decision, right? And sometimes a mistake follows you around for a long time.
It did 6.5 hours. It was, So we eventually got moving. We got onto the last leg, which was a hike leg, and that was where we were summiting the final mountain. So we'd summited the second mountain on the first hike leg that we'd done, which was amazing. You could see all down the coast. We stopped and had lunch up there. It was just brilliant. And then we summited this last mountain. And I think my lesson from the last one was that there was a point where we were going up really steep terrain and I was having trouble. And the reason I was having trouble was because I really needed to poop and I hadn't. And so I was trying just not to, and once I got to a point where I was a different person.
Right.
I could go so much harder because I'd actually relieved myself.
Sometimes your body that's part of the deal, right? Your body is going to, food goes in, not food comes out, and you have to kind of manage that sometimes.
That's right, yeah. And we got to the top of this mountain eventually, and this is end race. We're on our way to the finish line. This is the last leg, but we got to the top of this mountain, and it must have been around kind of 4:35 a.m. And so the sunrise hadn't come up, but first light had come up, and there was just red clouds all the way down the coast.
Yeah,
I just wanted to stay there.
It's
this race took us.
You earned the view. Right. Yes. You knew you were going to finish. You were going to survive the race. Everything was aligning. You had gone through hard times, gone through good times. And so you had that, the reward of nature came across.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was it. And it was really wonderful. And so we, took that in for the 5 seconds that we could, found the CP and then bombed it down the hill. Again, walking, not running. And, we finished. We got down to the water's edge. We got across the line. We got across the line in 47 hours and 48 minutes. So we squeaked in with 12 minutes to go, and we walked across the line. We didn't really. We did a little jog at one point to catch up to them because there was a team in front of us. We thought, catch up to them. That'll make us feel good.
Right.
And we just kind of walked across the line, and it was just it's a fantastic feeling, to finish and to finish in the time that we set out to, even without compromises. The satisfaction and like I said, crossing the line as mates. We didn't cross the line being like, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with you anymore. It was a real team effort, and the boys in particular helped me, make sure I could get across the line. So they all did an amazing job.
So it sounds like when you look at your experience, you had in some ways you had a typical adventure race experience, and you had some parts that were untypical, right? You had those two things go together. Yeah. When you look back on the race that you had compared to the race that you were going to have, how connected are those two parts?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan. I think for the most part, I would say they're fairly connected. I don't think that I was expecting to have what's the best way for me to put this? I don't think I was expecting to feel as demoralized as I did in in those hard times. I knew that it would be hard, but I didn't expect it to get me so down in those times. And I think that's probably the biggest differential.
So you were taken aback at the depths of how hard it was, how bad you felt.
The depth of despair that we were kind of in that moment. And I don't know if you realize this, Brian, but I'm generally a pretty upbeat guy.
Yeah, and it basically pours out of you. Yeah, I know. Exactly.
Yeah, great.
So it must have been, that must have been a bit of a shock to your system to say to yourself, like, holy cow, this really isn't fun. Like, this is really miserable.
That's it. And I take that on board. Like I said, I work in outdoor ed, and one of the things I've wanted to do one of these races for a long time. And when I look at adventure racing, and I'm even thinking about that episode you did with Dr. Michelle and Dr. Kathleen, and what adventure racing enables people to do, like to go into that mode where you need to develop some resilience and then come out the other side. Going into that depth of despair, there's something that it does for you, so that when you come up against something hard next time, you can look back at something that you have already done that was hard and say, hey, I did something that was hard. I can do it again. And not everyone is upbeat like me. My approach to life, or most things in life, my philosophy is, how hard can it be? How hard could it be? Sometimes the answer is very hard. But the initial approach is, let's give it a crack. And I think that's that kind of approach is a bit lost on people these days. And we're getting more comfortable as a society rather than being uncomfortable. And I think, adventure racing just brings this brilliant opportunity for people to get uncomfortable but know that it's temporary.
By the time this episode comes out, most likely it would have been out there. Grant Killian, who is the race director of Untamed New England, who's one of my earlier races was one of his races. He talked about the idea of adventure racing or contrived inconveniences. Is that we put ourselves in these situations, and because we like the sense of challenge and the sense of working through them, that there's definitely something to be said for realizing that you have internal capacity, that there's that something can be difficult, and you could draw upon a reserve of strength and resiliency and teammates and support, and you can work your way through that. And I think that as people, and children too, I think that when we do that in the controlled situation of an adventure race, that we realize that because we could do it there, we could do it outside the experience. And I think you're right about that. I think that there's definitely a lesson to be learned that people who do a lot of adventure racing, I would argue, and I don't have the data on this, but I would argue that most likely that the way that they approach life's challenges are different from people who don't have that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't often, I think you're right, it's maybe a societal thing. Like I said, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but anecdotally, it looks like we don't seek to purposefully put ourselves in uncomfortable situations. In fact, we run away from it. And so I'm not a doctor, but perhaps there's something in that where that plays out into other parts in our lives.
Exactly.
And so,
And there's also there's a balance too, though, because what you don't want to have is you don't want to give people unnecessary pain. Right.
That's right. Exactly.
There's that line there where you talk about what people can or cannot do. And I think with race directors, and kudos to Chris for putting this together and so many other good race directors out there, is that really, really skilled race directors are very good at creating experiences that allow participants to push themselves to the upper reasonable limit of what they can or cannot do. And let them make that choice, whether it be a Rogaine where you do 1 out of 4 CPs, whether it be like whatever it is, we're creating these experiences inside the controlled community of adventure race where people can push their outer boundaries and limits of what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely. If we were in the Hurlocker, we totally could have skipped big chunks of the course. We could, there are some teams who they got to those mountains and they were like, that's actually too much for us. We're gonna skirt around and we're gonna do something else. And, that's totally fine, right? Yeah, that's it. If there's an out if you need it. And that's the beauty of it, I think, that you can choose how hard are you gonna go.
So clearly you had, and looking back on the experience and then thinking about it and speaking about it, you had the experience that you would hope for, that you would wanted, and you got every piece of the course, every piece of the race. What is your horizon like? What did you, now you're 48 hours, you did a 48-hour race. It was your first race. You live in Australia, a lot of great races in that part of the world. What's next for you?
So in November, the Top Dog 24 is happening in Canberra. So I'm going to go and race that with one of my mates from school, who it'll be his first adventure race. We were just having dinner the other night and he was dot watching me on the weekend and he said, I just wanted to do it. I said, well, let's do one. There's one coming up in November.
As a two-person team?
At the moment, it's a 2. So that'll be new for me. But I might be able to entice some other people to join us. Who knows?
It's not how that works. Like here you are, you're a work minding your own business, and all of a sudden your workmates say, "Hey, we need a 4th person." Yeah. You do the race. Now all of a sudden, now you're bringing this other guy. That's how it works, though, right? You bring other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think this kind of how hard can it be attitude that I like to try and approach things with. Andy and Jimmy and Bryce were telling me about the Legend, which is the expedition one that happens in it.
Yep.
And I was like, it's happening in March next year. And I was like, you know what, next year that's probably a bit too soon to jump into my 5-day. And, a lot of this just comes down to time and managing family commitments and money.
Together. It's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but I'm thinking perhaps 2026, I'd love to have a crack at Legend and just have, go from 24 to that full week.
What's nice is for you is where we're kind of sitting now in terms of the larger community is that there are many options out there for a lot of races, whether it be a local 5-day race, whether it be traveling international race, things like that. That we're very, very fortunate that the community itself is filled with both people who direct races for their entire lives, people who are citizen race directors who have other pursuits. We're starting to see continued growth in the sport. That people like you who want to take bites of it, it's out there waiting for you, which is a really nice thing to say.
Oh yeah, I've got my as far as races go, up and down the East Coast, there's heaps of them, and varying races. Having jumped into a 48. The idea of doing a 6, to me is like, oh, okay, that'd be over really quick, wouldn't it?
Right. That's what happens, right?
Yeah, but there's a 6 that happens in the Royal National Park where I live. Yeah. So how convenient is that? And that's even something I could get my son into. And he's 9, but once he gets a bit bigger, we can race together.
And that's the gift of the sport is that there's such a variety in terms of distance and length and time that you really have a lot of choices when it comes to those kinds of races. Where after doing 48. You could certainly take the day and do a 6 and have a great experience because you have the 48 in your background. The 6 is much more accessible. What's interesting is that you may say, I'll never race more than a 48. Well, next thing you know, you might find yourself on a 6 or a 10-day race. So that's how the sport kind of grows.
I hear about the guests that you have on the show and they've done these 6 10-day races, and I am a little bit jealous that
well, be careful, your time will come.
That's right. That's right.
When it's like day 5 and it's type 3 fun, remember this conversation. Yeah, you're jealous.
I will.
You're no longer jealous.
That's right. That's right.
Listen, Scott, I so appreciate you reaching out to the Dark Zone. So appreciate you going on. To close this out, I want you to just take a moment, and there are people that listen to the Dark Zone who are newer to the sport, who want to get into it. And you're a really, really good guest because you're someone who took that leap into a big race from the first part. So what is your biggest piece of advice for the newer racer that's out there right now?
I think the thing that got us through the race, our team, and helped us to have this really good, positive experience, despite the challenges and those things, was that from the outset, all of us knew and agreed what we were there to achieve, which was we're going to try and clear the course in 48 hours. And that's how hard we're going to push. Like, everyone had the same mindset. And so when it came to making decisions with our team, we all knew what the decision was getting us to. There wasn't half the team who were trying to go as fast as they can and the other half weren't. Everyone was on the same page. The team that I was with, the team makes the experience. And so I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I would give to a team that's starting. Make sure that everyone is clear and that everyone agrees with what you're trying to achieve, because that'll make the harmony of the team way, way better, which in turn will make your experience way, way better.
All right. Thanks to Scott for coming on to the show. What a fun listen. What a fun guy to talk to. He just did another race, a 24-hour race. He said it was super hot down there in Australia. He had a great time. He also dragged another one of his friends into the race, like he was dragged into his first race. So a lot of race dragging going on down there. So thanks again to Scott for coming on. Thanks for being a listener. If you like what you hear on the Dark Zone, please head over to your streaming platform of choice and click, and subscribe. The algorithm likes that. We are getting subscribers and listeners, and that is due to you, the supportive listener. Have a good time out there. Good luck in 2025. And remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.